Today's show is brought to you by TestCube. Are flaky tests slowing your Kubernetes deployments? TestCube powers continuous, cloud-native testing directly inside your Kubernetes clusters. Seamlessly integrate your existing testing tools, scale effortlessly, and release software faster and safer than ever. Stop chasing bugs in production. Start preventing them with TestCube. Check it out at testcube.io/cloudcast.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Hope everybody is doing well. We are getting towards the end of October 2025. And, one of the things that we've talked about quite a bit on the show, both in the cloud and AI news of the month, and Aaron and I talking about different things and a number of my weekend perspectives. We've been kind of, I guess, trying to do some predictions about this AI space, and obviously this is a space that has a tremendous amount of hype, more investment than we've ever seen collectively, just in the last 2 or 3 years itself. Let alone, the whole feels like the entirety of the internet growth and the cloud growth and all those sort of things. But one of the things that we've been trying to figure out, because again, a lot of the investment, a lot of the hype and so forth right now. I don't want to say doesn't feel justified, but doesn't necessarily feel like the math completely works out. We're seeing companies burning through money at unprecedented paces. We're seeing, expectations being set very, very high. And again, that doesn't mean that all these things won't pan out. They very well may pan themselves out. I mean, we've seen, every 10 years or so, technology trends sort of take off. And by no means are we sort of downplaying any of the AI stuff. But what we're really kind of trying to figure out is, right now, the most basic thing is, investments levels are incredibly high. Profitability is still not there. And again, we're only, a few years into generative AI and so forth. But it does feel like, somewhere along the line, something is going to have to give, because we have, cloud providers who are, selling the most expensive chips in the world, saying that they're going to increase margins, even though those numbers don't necessarily pan out the way they are. We're seeing, a single vendor sort of dominate the accelerator market in terms of GPUs. We're seeing just a whole bunch of things that right now you sort of just go like, the maths don't math. And again, it's not a knock on the overall market. It's not necessarily a knock on the technology itself. It's just kind of looking for signs or signals or things to sort of figure out, what's going to have to give in terms of this market getting to a point in which it can grow significantly, and not just a single company or two companies or whatever it was. Every other major industry shift, every era that we've seen has had its early leaders, but then it's also had mass market adoption, broad sets of ecosystems, lots of competitive players in the market, players that, got profitable and so forth. And so I want to dig into a couple of data points and a couple of things that are starting to, kind of pop their head up as, worth looking at, just in terms of, where do we see things sort of expanding? Where do we see things being uncertain? And again, all of this is not intended to be sort of financial advice, but really intended to sort of just look at the market, how it's evolving, how it's shaping. And again, basing it on certain amount of what we've seen in the past, in past, era defining early stages, but also, trying to be very open-minded that this one may be very different than the other ones. So with that, we'll get into that right after the break.
Agriculture, the world's most vital industry, is on the verge of a digital makeover. On Interconnected, a new show by Equinix that explores the hidden infrastructure behind our connected future, they explore the ways edge computing, AI, and other modern innovations are reshaping how food is grown, sent, and delivered. Global agri-food leader Christine Gould lays out the digital challenges farmers face and where change is already sprouting. Listen on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts.
And we're back. And as I mentioned at the top of the show, I want to dig into just a couple of points that feel somewhat contradictory in terms of sort of where the AI market's going and what do the economics look like of it. Because again, not trying to predict what's going to happen, not trying to forecast winners and losers here, but really just, trying to get a sense of, at least for right now, as we've always tried to do on this show, is sort of follow the money. and figure out what the economics look like. And again, the economics of things can change over time. Just as an example, when cloud computing first came out, AWS was always bold to talk about the number of price cuts that they had. And, part of it was, as they were scaling out, as they were able to acquire more assets to scale out their storage, scale out their compute, they were able to reduce prices, and they passed those prices along to customers, and they made a big deal about it. It's very much sort of the Amazon model of, you're never going to really want to pay more for something. You're always going to want to pay less. And they kind of continued that. And for a while, those were the economics of cloud computing, was that cloud computing, because of the scale that was being amassed by an AWS or Azure or Google or anybody, the expectation was over time, the unit economics of that, because of the volume they could buy, the better they were getting at automating things, the more prices were going to come down. That at least for a while, those price cuts were passed along to customers. And a lot of the times it was very much and then over time, what it became was, well, we didn't reduce prices, but the performance of a given processor or a given model or mode of compute, for example, was following Moore's law. So for the same price, you were getting 50% more compute, right? And again, this was sort of the economics that changed over time of cloud computing. And so we're trying to understand, sort of where we are today as of, almost the end of 2025. Where are we today with sort of the economics, especially around generative AI? There's been sort of three things, and I've talked about a couple of these before, but there was another report that came out this past week. And so again, the more data you have, the more sort of points that you have, you can draw lines between and make some, just assumptions about where things are going. So, the first one that we had, and this has been around for a while, these links are all in the show notes, was, Jensen Huang, CEO of NVIDIA. He has talked for a long time now about, how the people that are building frontier models and anybody that's building on top of frontier models, in order to stay advantaged in the AI space, you are always going to need to be working with the latest state-of-the-art GPUs, and you're always going to be, you're always going to be working with the latest frontier model. And basically, what he was sort of saying is, well, the frontier models, are evolving every 3 months, 6 months, and that NVIDIA was always going to deliver the sort of fastest chip. And again, really, what that's sort of saying is, there's a link in the show note that points to a Stratechery article. It really kind of pointing out this idea that, in his mind, in order to be successful with AI, the only people that are going to be able to get the best results that'll be differentiated, will be the ones using the latest and greatest stuff. And again, there's a part of that there's probably a certain amount of math and science behind that sort of statement. And at the same time, it's a fantastic sort of forward-looking sales statement to signal to the marketplace that as the leader in a certain market segment, i.e. GPUs, people should always be paying the sort of the premium for what they're delivering, right? We haven't seen NVIDIA necessarily deliver like a set of reduced cost type of ones. Like we haven't seen the sort of NVIDIAs of the world going, hey, we're going to start reducing the cost of that. And again, a lot of that right now is based strictly because they are entirely supply constrained. And so there's no reason for them to reduce prices. But, so on one hand, on one pillar, you have this thing of, in order to be able to be successful with AI, to get the most out of AI, you've got to be using sort of the latest and greatest frontier models, and you've got to be using the latest and greatest, accelerator hardware, i.e. GPUs. Okay, so fine. And then the second piece that came out, and this came out, I don't know, a few weeks ago. Again, sort of an article that was referenced in Stratechery, but it's an article written by somebody who kind of follows the space, but also follows kind of how software is being built, the business models around software, and specifically around SaaS. And what they really kind of talk about is, a claim, a statement that the cost of tokens, which again, we're not really talking about GPUs, not really talking about CPUs. We're talking about tokens in a generative AI model in terms of, how much capacity is being fed into the model via prompts. How is that being turned into tokens? What does that then, through the transformative process and what happens in the LLMs, turn into tokens that come back out into whatever's generated, whether it's text or video or whatever it might be. And in essence, what they were sort of saying is while the chip manufacturers are talking about having bigger context windows. The model makers talking about bigger context windows. The chip manufacturers talking about having, better caching and more memory and all these sort of things. ultimately the cost of tokens is actually going up. It's not going down. And their rationale for this was not so much on a pure like per watt per token basis. What they were saying is now that we've been around generative AI and we're starting to see what it's capable of, people are moving beyond just basic kind of input prompts and responses into much more things around reasoning, around deep learning, around expert mode, whatever the more advanced capabilities are of these LLMs. And what they're saying is, what used to be a common set of prompts or a common set of kind of interactions is now exploding 10x, 100x, 10,000x. And so, the cost in order to be able to get something that people now believe are excellent or differentiated, whatever the category might be with whatever domain it might be, has gone up. And the point they sort of make to that is that's going to be problematic for SaaS vendors, especially because the model for SaaS was, you made investments up front, you made a lot of investment in engineering and marketing and sales, so you were going to probably be negative in terms of, so you were attracting customers, you were driving revenues, you were probably going to not be profitable for a while. But at some point, you could kind of turn off that spigot of having to constantly sell to people, having to constantly market to people, because they kind of got attached to your product. That became part of their workflow, became part of what they did. It became sticky. And at that point, you had optimized your code base. You understood your customers' use cases pretty well. You weren't necessarily having to, build tons of new features in order to keep them. And so at that point, you could sort of flip the economics around. You were renewing customers. You could renew them at higher tiers and higher premiums and so forth. And you could, become a profitable, sticky subscription-based business. And essentially, what they're saying is that sort of economics isn't necessarily going to work when the cost of tokens and the cost of differentiation continues to rise over the life cycle of a SaaS customer, for example. And I'm just using SaaS as an example because, so many people are talking about, hey, yes, they're going to be cloud AI native applications, but in many cases, we're going to be bringing AI to existing applications, right? Whether it's AI agents or whatever it might be. And so now you have your first sort of contradiction of, we have to stay at the highest price in order to be able to differentiate things. The economics of software and SaaS and so forth don't expect that to necessarily happen in order for it to be profitable. And so we've got a conflict there. We've got that sort of challenge. And then the third piece that came along that I thought was interesting, and again, I'm not trying to single out any one of these things, but I'm trying to sort of see where we are in the marketplace. And the third one was Oracle Cloud. So Oracle Cloud, a couple of weeks ago, we talked about it on the Cloud AI News of the Month, and we've talked about it a few times here in the last month or so, has made a lot of news in the generative AI space. They have allegedly won a number of large contracts with 5 or 6 large generative AI players, OpenAI being one of them. And we're seeing them talk about in the public to the financial media as well as the press, technical press, about having won these really big deals and deals that are going to be a finite amount of money, say $300 billion over the next 4 or 5 years. And the first part about that's sort of interesting is you typically don't see companies kind of making those bold proclamations. I mean, we do see people say, well, I signed a deal for whatever. This one is a little more weary because the people that they sign the deal with don't necessarily have the funding at this point in time. And in order for them to be able to have that funding, they are going to have to grow their revenues significantly from where they are. And I think I talked about it. We were talking about maybe double or more than doubling, OpenAI revenues from where they are today every year, all the way through like 2030, in order just to be able to have the minimum amount of money to be able to pay that back, right? So again, not really making a comment on whether or not the Oracle and OpenAI stuff is legit or partially legit. It is a signal to the market of the need for massive amounts of capacity, and that's all well and good. Maybe it happens, maybe it doesn't. But the interesting point was Oracle, kind of got a big bump, kind of got a big ramp up in the market from that, and a lot of people were sort of going, okay, wow, Oracle's really rocketed up the charts in terms of where they are in the hierarchy, in the pecking order of cloud providers delivering AI services or delivering AI capabilities. And then people started digging into Oracle's business a little bit. There were some alleged leaks of some internal documents from Oracle talking about what their profitability today look like on the AI chips that they had been renting, on the GPUs that they've been renting. And in essence, it said, right now, the profitability margins of that environment is somewhere in the like 10 to 15%. So sub 20% profitability or gross margin in that space. And the first concern, that the red flag that came up for that was, well, Oracle software business and even their SaaS business for other services is significantly higher than that, somewhere in the 40 to 60% range. And then what came along this week was Oracle did a kind of a media day or an analyst day with Wall Street and several other people, and a number of the details of that got out into the press. And in essence, what they were saying was, we're going to take our profit margin from like 10% or 15% where it is today up to 20, 30, 40% over the next 4 or 5 years. And that's the way that we're actually going to be able to significantly grow the business at a very high profitability level, or at least in a ballpark that is somewhere near the other parts of our business, right? And again, Oracle's business by itself is, whether it's relevant to this discussion or not relevant, up to people to decide. But what was really interesting about it, I thought, was there was also a breakdown then of the profit margins of Oracle in their sort of GPU fleet. And what it sort of broke down was, the latest and greatest, like the H200s, the H100s, the A100s, and some of the previously backdated, previous generations of the GPUs. And in essence, what it sort of was showing was, for the H200s, the latest and greatest, there was, stuff in that 20% sort of profit range. And then it significantly dropped for every single release behind that. So everything that wasn't latest and greatest, next generation GPU, Oracle at the time was not able to make, sort of profitability that would have been anything like what they're forecasting, 25, 35, 45% margins. And, so it felt like yet another data point that was, okay, some of this doesn't necessarily add up. You've got, the number one supplier who is, making huge margins, is supply constraints, has no real reason necessarily to decrease their profitability of what they're doing, right? And, while there have been some other deals that have been signed, whether it's with AMD or whether it's, with Broadcom and some other companies in terms of trying to build capacity, in essence, they're trying to expand capacity beyond what NVIDIA can do, not necessarily to be a counter to NVIDIA or to drive down prices. You've got one of the large now cloud providers in terms of Oracle, one of the largest customers of NVIDIA, basically going, well, we're going to drive our profitability margins up that. And it's very possible that to a certain extent, they will be able to do that for some amount of automation of their internal infrastructure, maybe, right? I don't know how much they can necessarily drive out of that. Maybe it's 10, 15 points of efficiency. Maybe they become 100% more efficient, but I don't know that drives 30 points of profitability margin. So what that means is one of two things. Either they think they're going to be able to better negotiate with an NVIDIA, which again, NVIDIA is supply constrained. They don't necessarily have a reason to necessarily do that. Or the other way they're going to do that is they're going to increase the prices to the people that they've made these deals with. So an OpenAI or whoever. So, what that ultimately means is, like many other things, when prices rise, that's typically going to get passed along to the end consumer. So, you can imagine if you're paying $20 today for an OpenAI account, maybe it's going to be $50 or $80 or $100 in the future, right? And again, that's for the introductory price point, right? So, and again, this sort of gets to the idea of, what the point of, the sort of SaaS comparisons. And so again, you look at all these things, you look at rising valuations, you look at rising levels of investment and so forth, and you sort of look at it and you go, by themselves, any of them are sort of equal or sort of interesting and potentially, forward-looking and really, hey, that's where the market's going. But when you start putting them together in terms of thinking about the entire ecosystem of the supply chain of equipment suppliers, cost of building the models, then being able to turn that into a software application that is, going to be widely adopted at whatever price point that might be, but we know the price point today that they're gaining adoption at. Will people have the elasticity to do that at 2x, 3x, 5x, 7x? We'll see. I don't know that we've necessarily seen markets in which that necessarily happens. And there is an expectation that they're going to grow more and more of their free users into paid users. And so it is interesting to sort of watch the escalation of all of these things from an AI perspective. And again, none of this is a condemnation on the industry. It's not a condemnation on sort of the economics of where any of those things are today. It's just thinking about them in terms of sort of the broader supply chain, how one connects to the next, how one is dependent on the next, where there are vendor choices, where there is ecosystem choice, where there is lock-in and so on and so forth. It does feel like some things are starting to bump into each other, and it does feel like maybe something have to give. And maybe the thing that gives is, in order for, maybe we're looking at a new generation of Gen AI in which we have a very big haves and have-nots, right? So if you start asking people to pay $100 a month, you're going to create a pretty significant haves and have-nots, right? Versus say $20 a month, which is its own haves and have-nots and so forth. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to watch. We are looking for some early signals. We're looking for some better picture of what the bigger picture looks like. And again, a lot of these things right now are difficult to necessarily gauge because we are supply constrained, whether we're supply constrained on data centers, on chips, on the number of, data scientists or even just, non-data scientists who are able to build things with the AI tools as opposed to just sort of chat prompt them, right? So the number of people that could build an AI agent, number of people that could build an AI agent system is still in the infinite early days, infantile, not infinite, infantile, earliest days. So again, just throwing some things out there, trying to get a sense of what the bigger ecosystem looks like, where the connectivity is between these and where push and pull may start happening in the future. So anyways, with that, I'm going to wrap it up. Hope everybody's doing well. Sorry for this one being out late a little bit. Had some more travel going on this last week. So with that, we'll wrap it up. We'll talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.